Howdy, it's John's D&D Vlog, episode 34. I'm going to keep talking about Chainmail today. Today I'm going to actually try to show you how to play Chainmail in a pretty detailed manner. I got three problems though. First, I want this to be a really good instructional video on Chainmail, but I also have to be careful to avoid copyright violations. I shouldn't show you too much of the book. If my video makes it harder for those guys to sell the book, then I'm probably making a mistake. Fair use rules, they're pretty important, so I can't show you everything. But I will show you page numbers of where things can be found. For the record, I'm using the 3rd edition silver-covered copy. The second problem I got is that there's a lot here. It'd be really hard to show it all to you, and if I were to show you a battle that has that follows all of the rules, and there's a lot of rules in here, it'd be a really boring thing to see. I mean, just that simple little combat I did last time took 5 minutes, and that ignored most of the rules, right? So I don't want to bore you, so I'll show you things, but I'm not going to be able to show you a full-blown combat, but I'll do what I can. And believe it or not, since I've been making these videos, just within the last week and a half, these videos specifically about Chainmail, they've actually taken the PDF for Chainmail and made it available to the public. You can get it at sites like drivethrurpg.com. So, I mean, congratulations. This book is going for about $100. You know, the old collectible one is going for about $100 on the net, but you can get a PDF of it for just $5, right? So if you want to see what D&D used to be like, you can do it very cheaply now. My third problem is pretty simple, actually. When Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin made the game, wargaming was pretty common in their culture, in their hobby society, right? Hobby community. There was a lot of information that they had access to that was common knowledge. I mean, everybody that they hung out with knew this stuff. So when he wrote his game, all of that stuff that was common knowledge, common sense to them, he didn't put it in the book. So it's it's not common knowledge anymore. People just don't know this stuff like they used to. So it's like putting together a puzzle. It's missing, some pretty important pieces, but I'll do my best. I showed this video in the last episode too. It's a video of a bunch of guys doing wargaming. They're celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. As I watched this video, I learned a few things. I thought I'd mention them before I get started. In this game, they use a referee. I don't know if they do it every time, but in this game, they used a referee. It's possible it happens every time. He has a similar function to the Dungeon Master in Dungeons & Dragons. He's the guy who has the final say in all disputes. What I also noticed is that the players only issue orders to their troops, the miniatures on the field, but the referee was the guy who actually did all the moving of the miniatures. It seems that he uses a cloth tape measure to do this. What I also noticed is that everyone's carrying around a clipboard, the ref and the generals, right? This makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of data to keep track of. Each unit has different conditions that you can apply to it, like they are retreating or they've been routed. And you also have to keep track of the weather, right? And you have to keep track of it over several turns. So if it rains a lot for several turns in a row, the ground becomes muddy and the troops' movement rates are all decreased, right? And if it becomes really hot over several turns, the morale of the troops go down, and this makes them much more likely to run away from battles. So you have to keep track of data for a long amount of time. You have to keep track of what's happened in these battles for the length of the entire battle. Also, concerning the miniatures, in my last video I said that I need to make different color counters to represent my troops, one color for each side of the battle. In most wargaming, it's usually dealt with in a much more interesting way. Most people use miniatures, right? So they go and they buy the miniatures of the type of soldier that they're going to be using in the battle. So one guy will go out and buy a bunch of German troops, miniatures that are dressed in German uniforms. And then the other guy, he'll go out and he'll buy a bunch of troops dressed in British uniforms. But I'm a poor boy. I got a few good things, but honestly speaking, I'm a poor boy. So I'm going to put a little sticker on the one troop for the one side, and then the other side, they're not going to have any stickers. So yeah, go ahead. Laugh at my poverty. I don't mind. I should probably talk about the surface you'll be playing on too. I looked over the net for information on wargaming, and it seemed like more than half of what people were talking about was the actual construction of their playfields. When I was looking for rules, I was looking for videos on how to do things, but everybody was trying to show me how to paint miniatures and assemble these different types of constructs on their playfields, right? It seems like all the wargamers, I mean all of them, half of what they do is all about the game, but then the other half of what they do, it's like they're a bunch of model railroad enthusiasts. it would be a lot of fun to do. I would enjoy doing stuff like that. There's a lot of people in D&D who do it also. Chainmail, the book, talks a lot about the different methods for constructing your play fields, but it mentions sand tables as being the most complicated, and therefore I assume they're the most rewarding. A sand table is just one or two sheets of plywood that have a raised edge around them, and then you put sand onto it, and you can sculpt the sand to be the different sorts of terrain types you want it to be, so you can put in hills very easily. And it's also, because it's sand, it's also reconfigurable. Anytime you want it to be something different, you just push the sand around. These things get really heavy, so Gary suggested that you put them either on your basement floor or on the floor of your garage. I've heard about some people wetting the sand down a little bit so that you can sculpt the sand a little bit better. They said that it should be like a sheet of plywood, which is 4x8, or you could have like two sheets of plywood sitting next to each other, so it'd be like an 8x8 square. And then you put on the sand, and you would then spend a lot of time adorning, putting stuff onto the sand to create the terrain types. So you put on little trees and little buildings. It sounds very intriguing. When Gary and Jeff wrote this book, they suggested that you use somewhere between 40 millimeter and 25 millimeter scale figures. From the Gettysburg video that I showed, that was done in 6 millimeter. There's a whole bunch of different sorts of scales you can use. If you'd like to see a good homepage that talks about scales, this is the one I looked at. This is the one I learned about scales from. It's good. I liked it. There are a few different scale systems people use. I'll describe a couple of them. Sometimes figures are referred to as like 25 millimeters or 40 millimeters. The size has a very specific meaning. It's the height of the miniature. According to the last page I showed you, though, it isn't the height of the actual miniature. It's just the height of it from its feet to its eyeballs. I guess wargaming miniatures are often depicted with helmets, so they can't really measure them from their feet to their heads. So instead they measure them to the eyeballs. All those sizes assume a miniature whose height from toe to eyeball is 1.6 meters. But then there's a little bit on top, right? From the eyeballs to the top of the head. So according to my calculations anyway, all of these sizes assume that the guys are all about 5 feet 10 inches tall. Sometimes they also use a scale system. This just refers to the ratio of the miniature as compared to how tall the thing would be in real life if you actually saw it and walked up to it. In all my games, I use 25 millimeter. That's what they use in D&D, so that's what I use in my games here. Okay, so let's talk about the actual game. You'll find a pretty complex turn sequence list on page 9, and it says, it explains who goes first and how you do it all, and you're going to want to study that. It's all really important, but I'm going to do a really brief version of it. So first things first, you find out who goes first. There's 2 different methods mentioned. Then you actually move, and then all artillery and missile damage is done. And after that, if a given group of troops have lost some, then you have to do an instability due to excess casualties check. And if they fail it, then they go and they run away, but if they pass it, then you continue on to the melee. And then if they lost any casualties in the melee, then you have to do a thing called a post-melee morale check. And if they fail that, then there's many different things that could happen, and I'll talk about that later. And if they have lost enough, then you'll have to do another instability due to excess casualties morale check again. So I'm going to move on now and talk about movement. I want this to be value, but I also need it to be brief so that you guys don't fall asleep on me. So I will go as quickly as I can, but I'll try to be valuable too. Okay, so let's talk about movement. The basic chart of movement rates is on page 10, but there are actually 2 other things to consider when moving your troops. The terrain type that they're moving across, and also the direction that you want to turn them in. In Chainmail, this is called facing. Anyway, so let's just go for a few examples here. These are 20 Lightfoot troops. They've got a basic movement rate of 9. So moving them 9 means moving them 9 inches. So that's pretty simple, right? You just grab them and move them 9 inches. That's it, right? But it's usually not that simple. There's a lot of other things to take into consideration. So, for example, let's consider a forest. Right? So what if they're moving through a wooded area? Okay. According to the charts on page 9 and 10, when they're walking through a wooded area, it slows their movement rate down by 50%. So that means you can only move them 4.5 inches. So anyway, according to my ruler, that's 4.5 inches from where they were. So as you can see, the lines on this grid, it's a little bit helpful at the very beginning of the game, but over time, your troops aren't going to stay on these lines. They're going to move all over the place. So your ruler and your tape measure are going to become a lot more important. What about water? So, for example, what if they're going across a river? I'm going to draw a shallow river here. And it's a shallow enough river so that nobody has to do any swimming, right? So how does this affect their movement rates? Once again, on pages 9 and 10, they go through some examples of the different terrain types and how much movement it costs. But to go across a shallow river like this, it costs 6. So that means that you would move 1, and then 6 more to cross it, so that's a total of 7, so that means my guys get to go 2 more. That's how a river will affect your troops' movement rate, right? Okay, but what if it's a deeper river? Then something different happens. It's halt, cross, halt. So it takes a total of 3 turns to cross this thing. You get to the edge of the river, and you halt. That means all the movement that you haven't used yet is discarded. Next turn you cross, which means that's it, you just cross, and that's the end of it. And then the turn after that, you have to halt once more. So halt, cross, halt, right? So it takes a long time to cross that river. I guess I should talk about just some basics of the chainmail world to help you understand things a little bit more, right? So each one of these men, it's actually not 1 man, each one of these is considered to be 10 or 20 troops, depending on the scale you're using. Also, 1 inch on the table is equal to 10 yards, and 1 round equals 10 minutes. Okay, on to turning, or to use the term chainmail prefers, facing, right? So as you turn, or as you face your troops, it sucks up some of your movement rate. You can read about it on page 11. Anyway, to do this, to help me do this, I made this thing. It's just basically a sheet of laminating film that I drew on the inside of, and all it does is it helps you measure the degrees. I also put this border inside. That helps me so that, like, after I've used it and I lay it down somewhere, if there was no border, it's actually pretty hard to find. So when I put the border in, it helps me find it later. So anyway, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to put it on my troops when I'm turning them, and it'll help me measure the number of degrees I'm turning them. Right, and I'm going to have to reach under, so I'll put my finger down and then I'll turn them, right? One problem, it doesn't appear to actually say anywhere in the book where I should actually measure my turns from. Where is the pivot point? I mean, should I have the pivot point be here or here or here? I don't know. It doesn't say what I have to do in the book, right? So I'm just going to choose the pivot point that I feel like using, and I will actually do it from this corner, right? You just put your finger on top of it, and then I'm going to do a 40-degree turn. So I'll reach underneath, and I'll go 10, 20, 30, 40 degrees, right? And then that's that. According to the book, this turning or facing is labeled as an oblique turn or oblique facing, and it costs my troops 1/4 of their move this turn. This means that after I turn them, I can still move the remaining 75% of my move. 75% of 9 inches equals 6.75 inches, right? So I just take my ruler and I put it down. And I will move them 6.75 inches. Like that. So that's what a turn would look like in chainmail. So I'm going to cover fatigue now. Fatigue is one of those areas where chainmail and probably wargaming in general, like all of it, get pretty persnickety. To do this right, you're going to have to keep track of all the different ways your troops moved each turn over the course of the entire battle, so get yourself a clipboard, some paper, and a pen, and be prepared to do a lot of memo taking. Before I go into detail, I need to show how chainmail views troops a little bit. Gary and Jeff wrote a system where the strength of your troops can increase and decrease depending on the current environment. They did this by saying that your troops would fight at the next lower or higher level sometimes. So these are the 6 basic troops, right? Think of them like the levels of a character in D&D. If it says that your troops attack or defend at a different level, then as far as their combat strength goes, they would fight as a completely different sort of troop. They aren't actually changing into a different sort of troop. So, for example, light horse, when they get tired, don't become armored foot. They just begin to fight as well as them. You can find the rules for fatigue on page 11. In short, there are 3 different ways your troops can become fatigued: movement, charging, and melee. They list a bunch of examples of how troops can become fatigued there. I thought that was a little too old school for me. I like using math rather than big, huge lists of examples. Anyway, for me, this is what I'm going to be doing. Full movement equals 20%. A charge equals 26.7%. Melee equals 33.3%. And if you rest one turn, then your fatigue level drops to 0. So every turn you add these numbers up, right? From one turn to the next, you have to keep track of how your troops have been moving, right? And if a given unit of troops ever has a fatigue level equal to or greater than 100%, then they're classified as fatigued. And while they're fatigued, they attack and defend at one value lower, and then their basic morale rating goes down by 1 until they've been rested. So anyway, I'm going to talk about morale now. This is the one area where you can kind of consider Chainmail to be a sort of role-playing game. In D&D, you have full control over your character, and the referee controls the world around you, right? In Chainmail also, you have control over your only one true character in the entire game. That's the general. And the referee has control over the world all around your general, right? You should consider your troops not to be your characters, but instead your henchmen and like your hirelings. And just because you're brave enough to go and do a thing doesn't mean that they will be. So there's 2 different types of morale checks you have to do, and they happen quite often. So I'm going to explain the easy one first. It's on page 17. It's actually really easy to understand. It's called instability due to excess casualties. If your troops, if the number of people in a given group of troops is reduced by so many %, then you have to roll 2d6 and see whether or not they're going to run or not. So like in the case of Lightfoot, they have to get an 8 or better, or Heavy Horse, they'd have to get a 6 or better. But then if they ever lose, like in the case of Lightfoot, if they ever lose like another 25%, then they're automatically gone. This is easy, and you have to check this after artillery, and you have to check it after missiles, and you always have to, anytime that the troop is hit at all, you always have to be prepared to check this number, right? You always have to be prepared to do this morale check. This one's easy. The other kind of morale check is called the post-melee morale check. According to these 3 formulas, both sides in a skirmish are looking to get a higher morale score than the other. These 3 formula are where each side can increase their score. So, like, has your side lost fewer troops than the other side? The side who has lost fewer troops only is going to get this number, right? Does your side have a greater number of troops than the other side? The side with the greater number of troops only is going to be the one to get this number. And like lastly, are your troops stronger than those on the other side? Both sides will get this number, but the stronger troops, of course, will get a better score. You can look for more data on this on page 15. Also, by the way, the above code ABS, it stands for absolute value. 10 minus 6 and 6 minus 10 have very different answers, right? But if you take the absolute value of them, they both have the same answer. So anyway, here's an example of how you might use these formula in a battle. So here we go. Here's an example, right? For this particular battle, I'm going to have 19 light foot going up against 10 heavy horse. And after one round, right, side A, the 19 light foot have lost 4, so they're down to 15, and the heavy horse lost 1. Now there's the moment you have to do the post-melee morale check, right? And we're going to find out which of these has more confidence than the other, and the one that has less confidence, they could do anything. They might run from the fight, they might surrender, they might continue to fight. It just depends on the difference between the one person's confidence and the others. Okay? So let's look at this. So let's check the confidence rating, the confidence score, whatever it is you want to call it, of the Lightfoot first. So you've got those 3 formula that we just got done talking about, right? So in this particular example, the Lightfoot, they lost more than the heavy horse side did, so they don't get number A. That'll be the number given to the heavy horse side, right? And then the Lightfoot have more troops than the heavy horse have right now. So because they have superiority in numbers, they get some confidence from that. So they will be the ones to get the B number, which is they're 15 minus the 9 heavy horse, so it's 6. They'll get 6 from that, right? Now, the standard morale rating for Lightfoot is 4, and there's 15 of them. So when you determine the C number, it's just 15 times 4 equals 60, right? So you add up all three of those numbers, A plus B plus C, and you get 66. So that's the Lightfoot's rating. And now let's look at the heavy horse. Let's see if they're doing any better or worse, right? So heavy horse suffered fewer casualties. So up here in their A number, right, it's their number of casualties minus the Lightfoot's number of casualties, absolute value of that, right? So for their A number, right, it's the Lightfoot number of casualties minus the heavy horse's number of casualties, 4 minus 1. That's 3, and then you add 1d6 to that, and I rolled a 3, so the 3 times 3 is 9. So they get 9, right? But they don't have superiority in numbers, so they don't get this B number. That's why theirs is 0. And the heavy horse is a stronger troop than the Lightfoot, right? So to get the C number, it's their current 9 heavy horses times their basic morale rating. You can find it on page 15. 9 times 8 equals 72, and you add all that up, and they get a total current confidence score, or whatever it is you want to call it, of 81. 66 versus 81. So if anyone's going to run, it's going to be the Lightfoot. Okay, so now that we have the two numbers, 81 and 66, you subtract the 66 from the 81, that leaves you 15, and you take that 15 and you check the chart on page 15 of your book, your copy of Chainmail, right? The thing is, this is a small fight, because it's a small fight, because neither side has 20 troops or more. The result is doubled, right? So the 15 isn't the result, it becomes 30, right? And if you check the chart on page 15, it will say that the Lightfoot, side A, backs away in good order for 1/2 move. I'll talk about weather just a little. The chart's weird, but it's good. I like the chart very much. But the times when it's actually going to come into play is only when you actually get all the way to the top of the chart, or you get all the way to the bottom of the chart, either excess heat or hard rain. Other than that, it doesn't affect what happens on the field. So it's an optional rule. You do what you want to do. The chart's weird. It's hard to understand. Give it a shot, though. I think it has value. So on to missiles. All the fighting part, the entire fighting part of the turn is divided up into 3 different segments. So at first you've got artillery, and then you've got missiles, and then you've got melee, and you have to check them all in order, right? I'm not going to cover artillery. I'm sorry. I just don't want to. Go ahead and figure that out on your own. But I'll talk about missiles a little bit, and then I'll go into melee. But to do the missiles, I think I'm going to go to the table. So I'm going to try a practice skirmish here. The main reason for this is to show what missiles will do. I'm going to try and include everything I've learned so far, so this will probably include some melee. We'll see how it goes. I'm a newbie, so please be patient with me. First things first, who's fighting? Over here I have 24 heavy horse. They're armed with very long lances, pikes. On the right, I've got 20 long bowmen, and they're Lightfoot, but then they also have longbows, so they're Lightfoot long bowmen. The fight starts with the heavy horse hanging out just beyond the range of the longbowmen. They have a range of 21 inches to their bows, right? This dashed line is that range marker, right? And the heavy horse will begin with a fatigue of 0. I wanted them to begin the fight with a charge, but unfortunately you can't charge on someone who's farther away than the charge range that you have. And their charge range is 18 inches, and they're 21 inches away, so you can't start with a charge. You've got to these guys are going to have to just move into the danger zone with a normal movement of 12 inches, right? Move at 12 inches. So I'm going to move them in, and this is going to leave them open to the longbowman's attack for 1 round, which is a little scary, but 3, 6, 9, 12. So now they are in range of the longbowman. The longbowmen do not move. They're just going to stand there. And because they've moved, I'm going to add 20 to the heavy horse's fatigue. Once they get to 100 or over 100, they fight at 1 level lower than they are. So they would start fighting as medium horse, but not yet. Movement is done, so now we move on to artillery and missiles. There is no artillery here, it's just going to be missiles. The chart for knowing how to do the missiles is on page 11 of your book. It's a hard to understand chart. The chart looks like something that I think Gary just assumed that everyone would understand just by looking at it. It's not terribly intuitive, and he didn't really explain it anywhere, but I'm going to try to. Your missiles will do different sorts of damage depending on how many men are shooting and on what sort of armor your victim is wearing. Unarmored, armor or shield, and fully armored. A die will also need to be rolled. The die will affect your total number of kills. The heavy horse here, they're fully armored. Full barding for the horses and full plate mail. So this means that you'll use the lower chart on page 11. So I'm going to roll a 6-sider. If I can get a 1, 2, 3, or 4, right, 3 heavy horse will die, but if I can roll a 5 or 6, 3 heavy horse will die. In other words, it's the same result no matter what I roll. So I'm not even going to roll it. So here come the missiles, and I'll take 3 of the heavy horse away. I'm taking them from the back because it's going to make my life easier later on. And they're in range anyway, so it should be okay. Next, according to the bottom of page 11, under the heading of rate of fire, archers can shoot again if they don't move or are meleeed. So let's let loose another volley and 3 more of the heavy horse die. So moving is done, artillery never happened, missiles are done. Next would be an id-tech check. Id-tech means instability due to excess casualties, right? According to page 17, I only have to do this check if the heavy horse lose 50% of their numbers, and they haven't done that yet. They've only lost 25%. So an id-tech check is not required. After that is melee, but they're not close enough for a melee to occur, so we're not going to do any melee. The last step of the round is a post-melee morale check. The info for this is found on page 15. I just showed you an example of this a few minutes ago. I'm not going to show you all the math, but the resulting morale scores were 162 for the heavy horse and 80 for the longbowman, right? So according to the chart on page 15, the longbowmen would be routed. This means that they would move back 1.5 times their normal movement rate, meaning 18 inches, right? 1.5 times 12 is 18 inches. According to page 16, this also means that they would lose their order. They wouldn't be an organized troop of soldiers anymore. This means that on the next round they would have to roll a die and get either a 1 or 2 to reorganize themselves. If so, they can fight. If not, the heavy horse or whoever was close enough to melee with them would be allowed a free attack on them. That's kind of boring though, and I don't want to have to move the camera, so I'm going to just ignore the post-melee morale check this time. Let's just move on to the next round. My heavy horse will move first. They choose to do a charge. They can charge up to 18 inches, but they don't need to go that far. And they're going to come right up next to these guys. To pay for the charge, it's going to cost them another 26.7, so that gets them up to 46.7. They are less than half fully fatigued, so they're fine. According to the book on page 18, when the cavalry does a charge, there's a third sort of morale check that is required. It's called a cavalry charge. So because the ones charging are heavy horse and the defenders are light foot, they'll need to roll a 10 or better in order to avoid running away. The heavy horse will also receive 1 extra die in combat in the melee because of this. It's called an impetus bonus, and it's explained on page 17. So I'm going to roll the 2d6. If I get a 10 or better, the longbowmen do not run away. Okay, so surprisingly, they got a 10, so they don't run. The longbowmen never moved, therefore the move is complete. On to artillery. There is no artillery. Now on to missiles. According to page 16, missiles may not be fired into a melee. However, melee has not yet begun. They're close, but the melee itself hasn't begun. So I will allow my archers to fire once into the heavy horse, and 3 will die. The longbowmen did not move and are not in melee right now, therefore they are allowed a second volley of arrows, just like last turn, and 3 more heavy horse die. Artillery is complete, missiles are complete. The next step is the id-tech check, instability due to excess casualties check. The heavy horse have lost half their number. This is the number required for an id-tech check. So I'll roll the 2d6, and if I get a 6 or better, the battle continues. Here I go. I rolled a 9, so the battle continues. The heavy horse do not run away. The next step is melee. Now that melee has begun, there will be no more missiles. The longbowmen must fight as light foot. Also, there are 2 ranks of heavy horse. I'll allow both ranks of the heavy horse to engage because their weapons are long enough for it. According to page 40, 12 heavy horse versus light foot.
The heavy horse will get 4 die per men that are fighting, and a roll of 5 or 6 will be a kill. So therefore I will roll 48d6 for the heavy horse. I will also add 1 die to this for the impetus bonus that I mentioned earlier. This bonus came because of the heavy horse's charge. So 49d6 for the heavy horse. Against heavy horse, the lightfoot will only get 1 die per 4 men, and they're going to need a 6 on each die in order to kill anything. They're only going to get to roll 5d6. So 49d6 versus 5d6. So anyway, here we go. And here's the result of the rolls. The heavy horse rolled 10 5s and 6s, so 10 lightfoot die. The lightfoot also rolled a single 6, so only 1 heavy horse is going to die. Anytime casualties occur, an id deck check is required. It's instability due to excess casualties. You can see about it on page 17. And if the lightfoot lose 25% of their number, the check is required. But in this instance, they didn't lose 25%, they lost 50. And when you lose twice the number that's listed on that page, the check automatically fails. Therefore, the remaining 10 lightfoot longbowmen run away and the combat is over.
So I'm going to talk about melee now, but I'm not going to talk about it much, right? You've got the chart on page 40. It just says combat, it's just a big chart. And it says how many dice a given type of troop will get to roll depending on who they're fighting against, right? And what number you need to score on those dice in order to have a kill be on the other side. It's usually either a 5 or a 6. Sometimes it's just a 6. Anyway, I'm going to let you just figure that one out. That chart was the easiest one in the book to understand. I got that one right away. Sieges, right? I was going to talk about sieges too, but when I started studying sieges, it said that the sieges were best dealt with using the man-to-man rules. And I was going to talk about that in the next episode. And honestly speaking, this video is getting pretty long already. So I'm just going to deal with that next time. There's a ton of rules in these books. There's a lot of them. And it's really for the number cruncher, bean counter, persnickety kind of guy to really get into. I mean, if you're that sort of a guy, good. I'm happy for you. I'm not really a war gamer, so I can only scratch the surface. I hope it was at least instructive. I hope it was interesting to see what D&D looked like before it was D&D. So anyway, I think that's it. I'm going to go. You have a good week. I hope you're having fun. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.